Welcome to the Copperfield Electric Podcast. What if I told you that the simple weekend project you're planning for your backyard could accidentally erase your home's visual depth, or like blind your neighbors, or in the worst case scenario, completely void your homeowner's insurance?
Yeah, it is the ultimate trap for the unprepared homeowner. People think exterior lighting is just, a fun hardware store run.
Right.
You grab a box of lights, stick them in the dirt, and you're done. But the reality of mixing high voltage systems, delicate aesthetics, and, well, unpredictable outdoor weather is incredibly complex.
It really is, and that is exactly why we are dedicating this deep dive to taking you on a comprehensive masterclass on how to plan a full exterior lighting project.
Absolutely.
We're pulling the curtain back using a really detailed expert planning guide on landscape lighting, and we are cross-referencing that with the service philosophies of Copperfield Electric, which is a top-tier 24-hour electrician based right here in Orange County.
It gives us a really unique vantage point, honestly. Like, we get the foundational design theory from the planning guide, but we filter it through the boots-on-the-ground reality of how these systems are actually built.
Yeah.
And permitted and maintained by professionals who see exactly what happens when it all goes wrong.
So for you listening, whether you are just trying to highlight a beautiful old tree in your backyard without it looking like, I don't know, a UFO landing pad,
Right.
or you're just simply trying not to trip on your driveway at night, the insights we're unpacking today will save you serious money.
Yeah.
And a lot of headaches.
Definitely.
Let's jump into the most common point of failure. According to our sources, almost everyone ruins their project on day one by doing the exact same thing. They buy the fixtures first.
Oh, it is such a classic mistake. You see a brass post light on sale, you buy 6 of them, and you just sort of figure out where they go later. Then, a few months pass, you buy a few spotlights for a tree, a year later it's string lights. And because there was no initial strategy, you end up with a completely disjointed yard.
It looks totally accidental.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this because our sources are pretty militant about how a project must begin. They call it the dusk site walk.
Yes.
But I have to admit, walking around my property in the dark with a notepad feels a little bit theatrical. Like, why can't I just look out my living room window on a Saturday morning and decide where I want the lights?
Because the landscape you see at, say, 10 a.m. is fundamentally different from the landscape at 8 p.m. During the day, the sun provides this ambient light that flattens everything out. But at dusk, you're watching the shadows physically form. You are seeing where the darkness actually settles.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, you have to physically map the canvas in the medium you'll be working in, which is darkness. So you map the entry points, the paths, the patios, and the architectural features, like a stone facade or a deep roof line.
It kind of reminds me of going grocery shopping when you're starving, but you didn't bring a list.
That's a great way to put it.
If I just walk into the store hungry, I'm, running down the aisles, grabbing a bag of chips here, some cookies there, and I end up at the checkout with a cart full of snacks that absolutely do not make a cohesive dinner.
That is precisely the dynamic. The dusk walk is your recipe, right? It's your grocery list. And during that walk, you have to assign a specific job to every potential light source.
Which the sources categorize into 3 distinct buckets, right?
Sure.
Safety, security, and ambience.
Exactly.
Now break those down for me because, safety and security sound like the exact same thing.
They overlap, for sure, but the intent is different. Safety is purely navigational. It's about lit paths, illuminated stair treads, and visible drop-offs so your guests don't twist an ankle.
Okay, makes sense.
Security is about perimeter defense. It uses brighter, wider pools of light near driveways, garage doors, side gates, basically to eliminate hiding spots and deter anyone who shouldn't be on the property.
And then ambiance.
Ambiance, on the other hand, is purely psychological. It's that soft glow around an outdoor patio that just makes you want to sit out there with a glass of wine.
Right. What's fascinating here is that the genius of naming these goals before you open a single catalog, it acts as a budget filter.
It really does.
If you look at a fancy fixture and you can't confidently say this serves safety, security, or ambiance, you just don't buy it.
It forces you to justify every single dollar. You avoid buying fixtures you don't actually need, which, keeps your budget intact for the hardware that actually matters.
So if having a solid strategy and a mapped out yard prevents you from buying random hardware, The next hurdle is figuring out what kind of light is actually going to come out of the fixtures you do buy.
Yes,
The sources spend a lot of time on something called color temperature.
they do, and they are incredibly strict about it. The golden rule is to stick to a warm white color temperature, which on the Kelvin scale is between 2,700 and 3,000 Kelvin.
Why that specific range, though? Like, what happens if I go out and buy a bunch of 4,000 or 5,000 Kelvin bulbs?
Well, the higher you go on the Kelvin scale, the cooler and bluer the light gets. Our brains naturally associate warm light, that 2,700 range, with firelight and sunset. It's inviting.
Right.
It also happens to beautifully flatter natural materials like bricks, stone, and green landscaping. But if you push into the cooler blue light, you trigger a completely different psychological response.
Like what?
It mimics daylight in a jarring way, making a residential house look institutional.
Oh, man. So it makes a cozy backyard feel like a 24-hour pharmacy or a commercial parking garage.
Exactly. But the most crucial detail here isn't just picking the warm light, it's the uniformity. You must use one consistent color temperature across the entire property.
Okay.
If you have 2,700 Kelvin on your path lights and a 4,000 Kelvin spotlight on your house, the clash creates visual chaos. Your brain instantly recognizes that something is off, even if you can't articulate what it is.
It's like wearing a navy blue sock and a black sock.
Yeah.
You might not notice it in a dim closet, but out in the world, it just looks really sloppy.
That's a perfect analogy.
Now, once we get the color dialed in, the planning guide introduces a very rigid metric for placing these lights, specifically path lights of the 5 to 7 foot rule.
Yes. For a standard straight walkway, your fixtures should sit 5 to 7 feet apart from one another. The objective is for the pools of light cast on the ground to just barely overlap.
Okay.
What you are actively engineering against is the runway effect.
See, here's where it gets really interesting. I'm struggling with the logic here.
Right.
If the whole point is security and visibility, my brain says, buy the widest beams possible, place them super close together, and light up every square inch of the grass.
Mm-hmm.
Why is flooding the zone a bad idea?
Because of how the human eye processes contrast at night. If you light up a path like an airport tarmac, you draw all the viewer's attention to the pavement itself. It feels confining. When pools of light just slightly overlap, it creates a gentle, continuous guide for your feet, but allows the eye to wander and take in the rest of the landscaping.
Oh, I see.
And the sources note, if your path curves or if you hit a set of stairs, you need to tighten that spacing down closer to 5 feet to maintain that continuous visual line without leaving dangerous dark gaps.
That actually makes a lot of sense. You don't want guests just staring at the concrete. You want them looking at the property.
Right.
Which brings up another major design element, beam width.
Right. You use narrow, tight beams of light to highlight specific architectural features. Think columns, dormers, or the trunk of a tall palm tree. This creates high contrast and drama.
Got it.
But you use broad, softer beams for ambient fixtures like wall sconces, where you just want a gentle wash of even coverage.
But again, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I have a beautiful yard and I want to show it off, why wouldn't I just take a bunch of those broad floodlights and wash the entire yard in light? Why leave any part of a nice garden in the dark?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know, but if you light every single plant, tree, and garden bed equally, you completely flatten the yard. You literally erase all the visual depth.
Wait, really? How does light erase depth?
Because depth is perceived through shadow. When you flood a space with uniform light, a 3-dimensional oak tree suddenly looks like a flat, 2-dimensional green blob against a bright fence.
Oh, wow.
Contrast is the secret ingredient that professional designers rely on. You uplight a specimen tree to catch the rugged texture of the bark. You wash a long hedge to define a subtle boundary. You spotlight a statue.
Okay.
But crucially, you must leave dark, unlit spaces between those focal points. The eye needs those shadows to understand distance and scale.
So the shadows are what actually create the 3-dimensional space.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have this stunning, perfectly color-matched, high-contrast blueprint on paper. But if the physical electrical layout is flawed, that beautiful design is just going to be a bunch of expensive metal sticks failing in the dirt. We have to talk about the underlying math.
Yes, the infrastructure. And outdoor lighting physics behave very differently from indoor lighting. Let's start with wattage.
The sources have a great rule of thumb here, actually. A light bulb that seems incredibly dim inside a bright house will look surprisingly intense out in a pitch-black yard.
So true.
Their advice is to always start on the extreme low end of a fixture's rated wattage. It is remarkably easy to swap in a brighter bulb later if a spot feels underlit. But if you start too bright, you're just blinding your neighbors.
And managing that wattage leads us to the absolute core of the system, the transformer.
Right.
Most landscape setups are low-voltage systems. The transformer's job is to take your standard 120-volt household power and step it down to a much safer 12 volts.
But the guide is adamant that you cannot just keep plugging an infinite number of lights into one transformer.
Yeah.
There's a strict mathematical limit called the 80% rule.
Exactly. You add up the wattage of every single bulb you plan to connect to that transformer. That total number absolutely cannot exceed 80% of the transformer's rated capacity.
So if I buy a 300-watt transformer, I'm only allowed to put 240 watts of lights on it. I have to admit, as a homeowner, looking at my budget, intentionally leaving 60 watts of capacity completely unused feels like I'm throwing money out the window.
I get that.
What do I need to pay for capacity I'm not using?
Think of it as preventing infrastructure debt. If you max out a transformer at 100% on day one, two things happen. First, the unit runs constantly hot, which degrades the internal components and drastically shortens its lifespan.
Okay.
Second, you leave yourself zero adaptability. In 3 years, when your landscaping grows and you realize you need a brighter bulb for that oak tree, or you want to add 2 more path lights, you can't.
Because it's maxed out.
Exactly. You'd have to buy a whole new transformer. That 20% buffer is an investment in the system's longevity.
That reframes it perfectly. You're buying headroom. And speaking of bottlenecks in the system, we have to talk about wire gauge and something called voltage drop. The sources warn that for wire runs over 100 feet, you absolutely must use thicker wire, specifically 12 to 14 gauge.
Because copper wire naturally has electrical resistance, the further the electricity has to travel down that wire, the more voltage it loses along the way.
So what does this all mean in practice?
Well, if you use thin wire on a long run, the lights closest to the transformer will look bright and crisp, and the lights at the very end of the line will look noticeably, sometimes embarrassingly dim.
Let me try to wrap my head around this. Is this like if I attach 3 or 4 long garden hoses together and turn on the spigot at the side of the house? By the time the water reaches the absolute back corner of the yard, the pressure has dropped to just a trickle.
Yes.
The water loses its, push. Is that what the electricity is doing?
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. Yes, voltage is essentially electrical pressure. And just like with water, to get a strong flow at the far end of the yard, you either need a much wider hose, which represents using a thicker wire gauge, or you need to change how everything connects.
Which brings up wiring methods, the daisy chain versus the hub method.
Right. In a daisy chain, you just run one single wire from the transformer to the first light, then to the second, then to the third. It's incredibly easy, but it's terrible for long runs because, just like your hose analogy, the pressure drops at each stop.
So the hub method solves this.
Yes. With the hub method, you run a thicker primary wire out to a central location in the yard, a hub. Then you run shorter individual wires from that hub out to 4 or 5 nearby fixtures.
Okay.
It balances the electrical load so every light receives the exact same voltage, meaning they all shine at the exact same brightness.
So if a voltage drop making your yard look dim is a frustrating problem, messing up the installation when water and weather are involved introduces a totally different, much more severe level of risk.
Oh, completely. This is where we cross the line from aesthetic design into strict life safety codes, especially regarding water features. If you are installing submersible lights in a fountain or a koi pond, the planning guide is unflinching, you do not guess. These require GFCI protected circuits and proper bonding to prevent stray voltage.
Wait, let me stop you there. Stray voltage. Bonding. That sounds like highly technical jargon for, electricity leaking into the water. How does bonding actually stop my fountain from becoming electrified?
It's a crucial mechanism. Let's break it down. GFCI stands for Ground Fault Circuit Interrupter. It's a smart outlet that constantly monitors the current.
Okay.
If it detects even a millimeter of electricity leaking out of the intended path, say, into the water, it cuts the power in milliseconds.
Okay, so that's the active shutoff. What is bonding?
Bonding is a physical backup system. It involves connecting all the metallic parts of the fountain or pool structure together with a heavy copper wire and routing that wire safely into the earth. If a wire frays and touches the metal frame of your fountain, stray voltage enters the water. Bonding ensures that rogue electricity has a path of least resistance directly into the ground rather than traveling through the water and potentially through a person or a pet.
That is terrifying, honestly, but it makes total sense why the codes are so strict.
Right.
And the rules apply to the dirt, too. The sources note that low-voltage wire must be buried at least 6 inches deep.
Right.
And if you're running wire underneath a driveway or a high-traffic walkway, you have to run it through a rigid conduit.
Because a shovel slicing through a bare wire while you're planting petunias next spring is a remarkably fast way to short out a $1,000 system. Yeah. Conduit is just cheap armor.
And if slicing a wire is an expensive mistake, doing this work unpermitted is a potentially catastrophic one.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources highlight that permits, which usually only cost between $50 and $150, are legally required anytime you're adding new circuits that tie directly into your home's main electrical panel. And here is the real kicker. If your house sustains electrical damage and the insurance adjuster discovers unpermitted, uninspected wiring, they can, and often will, completely void your claim.
That is the hidden massive cost of extreme DIY. It's a gamble with your largest financial asset.
Which naturally leads us to the actual budgets for these projects. According to the guide, if you're doing a modest layout, maybe illuminating a front walkway and adding a few accent lights to the porch, you're looking at roughly $1,500 to $4,000.
Right.
But for a full property master plan with smart transformers, water features, and architectural accents, a realistic budget is $5,000 to $15,000.
It is a significant capital investment in the property. However, the sources offer a fantastic strategy if you don't have that full budget today. Phasing.
Phasing.
Yeah, you start with the safety-critical areas first, the dark steps, the main pathways. But the secret is to buy and install the large transformer size for the full final future plan right up front.
See, I'm skeptical again. You're asking a homeowner to drop hundreds of extra dollars today on a massive heavy-duty transformer to support lights they might not install for 3 or 4 years. Is that really worth tying up the cash?
Absolutely, because ripping out a small transformer in 3 years, throwing it away, and paying an electrician to wire in a larger one costs significantly more than just buying the larger one on day one. It's about building a scalable foundation.
That makes sense. Do it right once. And that brings up the final, perhaps most important boundary in this masterclass, knowing when to put down the tools and call a professional.
The dividing line is pretty clear in the sources. If you are buying simple, low-voltage path lights that plug directly into an existing weatherproof outdoor outlet, that's a great DIY weekend project. But the moment you need a new dedicated circuit, a hardwired transformer, complex hub method wiring, or absolutely anything involving water, you need a licensed, bonded electrician.
Which brings us back to one of our primary sources today, Copperfield Electric. They are a family-owned 24-hour electrician serving a massive footprint across Orange County, from Irvine and Anaheim to Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, and beyond.
They really cover a lot of ground.
They do. And what really struck me when reviewing their protocols wasn't just their licensing or the fact that they handle complex EV chargers and panel upgrades. It was a specific phrase in their service philosophy: honest diagnostics.
That phrase stood out to me as well. In the electrical trade, it is incredibly easy for a contractor to look at a trip system and tell a homeowner, you need a total replacement.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time.
Right. What Copperfield Electric emphasizes with honest diagnostics is a commitment to rigorous troubleshooting. They actively look for the specific failure point, a bad relay, a corroded hub connection, so they can fix the actual problem without upselling you on replacing hardware that isn't broken.
When you are transitioning a $15,000 project from a piece of paper to a permitted reality, having a professional who views their job as protecting your budget rather than inflating it is everything.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's the difference between hiring labor and hiring a partner. You are guaranteeing the safety of your family against electrical fires, you are ensuring the hardware you invested in actually survives the elements, and you are maintaining your property's legal compliance.
It's the ultimate peace of mind. So let's quickly recap the core lessons from today's deep dive. First, you must execute the dusk walk to define your safety, security, and ambiance goals before buying a single fixture.
Vital first step.
Second, commit to one warm color temperature across the board and utilize the 5 to 7 foot rule to avoid the runway effect. Third, protect your infrastructure by following the 80% transformer rule and utilizing the hub method to prevent voltage drop.
Perfect.
And finally, when you hit the boundary of codes and new circuits, it's time to call in the professionals.
It is a rigorous process, but there is one final, profound outcome to all this planning that goes beyond just seeing your driveway. When you correctly execute a landscape lighting design, it manipulates your psychological boundaries.
Wait, how so? What do you mean by psychological boundaries?
Think about standing in your kitchen at 9 p.m. If your yard is unlit, the windows just reflect the interior of the house. The boundary of your home subconsciously shrinks down to the physical drywall.
Oh, right. Everything outside is just a black, inaccessible void.
Exactly. But when you push deliberate light out to the very edges of your property, when you wash a back fence or uplight a tree 50 feet away, you subconsciously expand the footprint of your home out into the night.
Wow.
You reclaim that darkness. Psychologically, your living space suddenly feels vastly larger, more secure, and infinitely more inviting. You are quite literally expanding your territory.
Expanding your territory into the night. That completely changes how I view those fixtures. It's not just about installing lights in the dirt. It is actively pushing back the void.
That's the real power of it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We highly encourage you to walk outside tonight, right at dusk, and look at your own yard with fresh eyes. Map out the shadows, build your grocery list of goals, and imagine what your home could look like when you reclaim the dark. Until next time.